we're out here in nature, which is appropriate.
We're walking, which is also appropriate.
Oh,
so.
Tell us about that. What's appropriate about that in Taoism?
I believe the symbol for the Tao is actually a variation of a walking person. And it's referred to as the path, of course. Walking the path.
Yeah.
Going from there. So it has a couple of the classic overlaps.
So that makes sense. Do you think, I think as one walks through nature, one observes nature and one sees the way things interact and the way they are, so that seems appropriate to our perspective, right? As a Taoist?
Yeah, I would absolutely say that. So the simple answer would be is that a Taoist is supposed to learn from his or her environment through that interaction, and learning what reality is, what the essential relationships are, learning to respond to them, and also learning to expand out of the human sphere. And so if you think of it, humans tend to have a very sheltered existence at most. If you look,
like a prescribed existence, right? They think this is the world and that's it.
Well, there is that, but there's also the fact that humans pretty much just interact with humans and either regard everything as superior to them or inferior to them. They don't actually have relationships with things outside of the human relationship.
Let's go down here.
And kind of fundamental to Taoism is reaching a point where you can cultivate non-human relationships effectively. For some people,
what does that mean, a non-human relationship?
Well, at a more basic level, you could think of having a relationship with an animal, meaning you have a pet. If you advance, the pet stops being a pet and actually becomes a companion. But from the ultimate Taoist perspective would be that the animal is an equal being having its own wants, needs, desires, and direction. And we can develop a relationship at that level with the other animal. Does that mean it's the same as you? No, but that's one of the things that you have to learn to balance or reconcile when you're developing that type of relationship. So it's essentially about expanding outside of just the limit of the human sphere and having a relationship with the greater reality around you rather than just what is human prescribed.
And we can learn that from nature, because as we're walking along, we're seeing, that we can observe that the trees have a relationship with the sun, obviously, and with we've got a little creek bed here, and we just saw some kind of raptor. We saw a hawk that was busy doing its life out here. Does that the right? Does that make sense? Is that the thing?
I mean, you just start off by being in it. If you look at, so Taoism is divided into levels. And original Taoism, so like the original Coke, is called Esoteric now. And so you have Esoteric Taoism, but all Taoism to start with was Esoteric Taoism. And if you look at the myths of the great sages and how they came about and how they studied, they're always encountered at some distant place in nature. Doing some sort of unusual thing within nature in order to acquire greater spiritual power and understanding.
That's like the master on the top of the mountain, right?
Right. And that is in many ways the esoteric pathway. But then you have the reality of what Taoism has become. Not that that's wrong, I'm simply describing it.
Okay.
And that is typically human-to-human interaction or human-moderated interaction. And the reason for that is that for most people, that's a better pathway than simply going out and getting stuck into nature in order to form your own relationship.
So instead of learning from nature directly, now it's learning from someone who has learned. You're learning from a master who can interpret it for you.
Yeah, and he, depending on the tradition, he may simply be working off of a written description as to what it happens to be. But
okay, so maybe it's not second degree, maybe it's third, fourth, fifth, but most people are going to be learning from a doctrine rather than going out and learning from nature itself.
Yes. And I think the method that's emerged over time is that it's kind of best to do both.
Oh, okay. So have some guidance, like maybe come out here and feel what you, or sort of learn what you, gather what you can, and then maybe you need some interpretation, or maybe you need some, someone to explain what it might mean. Is that?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's one of the reasons you have the story of the person seeking the great sage or master living in the woods for
Yes.
training or knowledge or consultation, rather than just going, yeah, I'm just going to head in the woods. And because just heading in the woods by yourself is a pathway to death as much as it is a pathway to anything else.
You need a lot of skills, that's true.
Yeah, you need a certain amount of skills, especially if you roll it back to an ancient era where there might not be any human contact for months at a time. That's a different level of skill.
Yeah,
so.
They didn't have MREs back then either.
Yeah.
Here, let's go ahead and turn around here. We'll go back up this path.
Okay.
It'll all work out. So I don't want to leave the park right now. So instead of, or no, in addition to going out into nature yourself, you can have the support of someone who has the wisdom. You know, you don't have to reinvent the wheel, as they say. You can have some help along the way.
Well, I mean, in many ways, that's the function of a teacher. And humans are meant to interact with other humans, but the Taoist argument has always been that humans are capable of doing more than interacting with other humans. And so you have that facet there.
Yes.
If you want to, there's an extensive amount of cultural myth and legend, which is kind of part of the Taoist culture. And so I've been going through and putting out articles that are documenting it because, and there are some excellent books out there on that too. It's not me simply doing that. Where I may have read something from a rare book 40 years ago.
Oh yeah.
Or it's a story I heard from my teacher when we were covering stories or myth or other components like that.
Yeah.
But the myth serves as a metaphoric understanding or study of nature. So it's a series of metaphors that you look at, you examine, you use them for contemplation. And that's also another way of learning from nature rather than direct from source. If you want to look at esoteric practice is about direct from source. You might...
Oh, okay, so you just going out into the woods.
Right.
Okay.
Going out into the woods or in exploration of nature is a much more esoteric approach.
Okay.
And contemplating myths or stories told around you or to you around the campfire or by the well or whatever artistically chosen
Yes.
area for impact, that would be a more modern metaphoric way of exploring things, you know, contemplating what's going on and trying to experience the emotion of a particular thing.
Oh, okay, yes.
Because, you know, you can be in a great natural setting and you may or may not have an emotional response to it, depending on the natural setting and what else is going on.
Yeah, that's true.
But as a storyteller yourself, as you know, stories about choosing what you focus on and what you discard. Too much, nobody follows it or cares. Too little, nobody follows it or cares. Nature, it doesn't care. Whether or not you are capable of the response, that's up to you.
That's interesting, huh? I think many people are overwhelmed by nature too. So it's not the same response if you're, you know, I mean, nature can be scary, and that's not going to give you the response that you want. That's not going to be the revelatory experience that you might get if you're hungry and cold and bears are chasing you.
That is true. It's a series of insights, certainly.
Right?
But Perhaps in a way that you want them, and perhaps in a way that you don't. But that's the nature of insights. So.
And the nature of nature is true. All right, so you were saying we have the esoteric tradition, just going out, figuring it out yourself, maybe with some foreknowledge. What's the most common or reasonable or effective way to find or be to reach the necessary Taoist insights today?
I'm not sure what you're saying.
I'm saying if someone's interested in Taoism today, they're not going to have the schedule availability to go out to either figure it out themselves in the forest, to commit to years of training with a master. Is there a middle ground for the modern person?
You have to know what you want. That's the big difference.
What does Taoism offer?
Well,
What's on the menu?
It really depends on what you want to be as a person when you come out of the process. It's okay to not know that. Like most people that undertake a spiritual journey, they may have a vague end in mind. They call it enlightenment.
Yeah.
Or if they know more actual Taoist terminology, because enlightenment's a borrowed term, comes from other religions. They may be able to sit back and go, okay, I like the thought of living in this way. I want to do this particular thing.
Yeah.
But most people will achieve that through the art of living, just essentially learning the four managements. And so that's managing resources, managing relationships, self-development, so in this context, spirituality, and self-maintenance, which can be things like hygiene, eating food, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, and
regular hygiene.
yeah,
Physical, taking a bath.
yeah. And when you, let's say, balance those four, which we've talked about extensively before, like to a point where most people will get annoyed. It can't just be blah, blah. It's like, it's those four things. The things that you want come from those four things.
Interesting.
So
they're basic needs, basic requirements for living a life that is responsive to the laws of nature, right? Does that make sense?
yeah, I mean, it's who you are as a human. That's what it's about. It's like humans do these things. Do the human thing. Now, if you want this, that I would really say is the midpoint. And sometimes you'll have people that have aspirations really for egotistical means. And interestingly enough, I'm not condemning that. That they want to be the blah or recognized as being the blah, whatever particular title you want to.
Are you talking about like reaching some higher spiritual level, or?
They want to be regarded as the holy person sitting on a stone that people come to visit, but at the same time, they just want to be regarded as that. They don't actually want to be that.
They don't want to do the work to reach that.
Well,
that's like a egotistical thing, right?
They're in love with the mythology of it. And the nature of all myth is that myth is a dramatically simplified story of what an actual thing is. Like whenever we see the mythical hero, I mean, if it's a good hero story, we get some insight into the hero. If it's a myth, it's usually very simplified. The hero encounters obstruction, rallies, him or herself overcomes obstruction.
Right, very simple. That's right.
But it's not a matter of like the humor, the hero being piss afraid, like just sitting there in the dark going, I don't know if I could do this. I don't want to die this way. I don't want to. That's where reality is.
Right.
And so the holy man quest isn't getting empowered by a distant beam because you led a life that was worthy of reward.
Right.
It's more the guy sitting in the dark, or the let's just say the person.
The person. Let's say person.
The classic Chinese pronoun being ta, which was a genderless pronoun.
Oh, perfect.
For most of Chinese history. So the person that person's going to be sitting there piss afraid half the time.
And the struggle is overcoming that, right?
Partly overcoming that. If you're in the esoterics, it's going to be overcoming that so you can overcome something outside. But you have to do both. It's the inside world and the outside world. And we can't ignore either one of those. And so a person can be inspired by the myth of it and want to be recognized as being that person. And I'm not saying they are that person or not that person. It's not the responsibility of any Taoist to really provide that condemnation or approval for another person.
Yes.
It's actually to that individual's, the aspiring holy man's, advantage to be accurate in whether or not they've actually achieved anything that they want. You know what I'm saying?
No, you missed me there.
Okay. So let's say you want to set up to be an excellent car mechanic.
Okay.
Okay. So you get a car mechanic sign and you sit underneath it that says excellent car mechanic.
Okay. Without doing anything else.
You've never done anything else. And then you have to fix your friend's car.
Oh no.
But you don't know how to. See, it was to your advantage to be the person that actually sits back and goes, okay, I don't know anything about this. I need to find a way of learning it.
Okay, so being honest with being aligned with reality.
Right. And honest with yourself, if you want to put it in those terms.
I see, yes. Yeah, if you want to be a mechanic, you have to recognize first that you don't know how to be a mechanic.
That is exactly it.
That's tough.
And it's not the responsibility, if they're Taoist, for another mechanic to sit around and go, you're not a mechanic. Because the thing is, you actually already know you're not a mechanic. Right?
On some level, yeah. You're just not admitting it.
Right. But within the social sphere, what you want is other people to connect to you as if you were the mechanic, because you want the status that goes with it, because you want the story that you have heard about mechanics to be your story.
Right, right. Oh, yes. Oh, we do that all the time, don't we?
Yeah. And is it your story? It's to your advantage, if you really want to be the person in that story, to be the person in the story, not to emulate the person in the story.
But our stories sometimes are that somehow we already have the skills, that we're just born with the skills, or that they are sort of ordained on us instead of the struggle of learning the skills. So the story is wrong.
That is part of the reality. That's the nature of myth. Myth is a dramatic oversimplification designed in many ways to please people rather than to challenge them. But it all has to be driven from an individual self. Once an individual makes the decision to deceive themselves, no other individual can change that. They have to change it. They have to make a decision of, okay, it's time for me to go beyond deception of myself. And I need the actual skills, because now it turns out I have to fix a bunch of cars.
Yeah.
So they have to do that thing. That's essentially one of the fundamental rules of spiritual development, as nobody can develop you spiritually. You have to make the choices that lead to spiritual growth. If you don't make those choices, then you don't get the growth. Now, I can't arm twist somebody into it. It's not my job. It's not my desire. I gain nothing from it.
Yeah.
And if we look at, well, why aren't you censoring or approving of this or that? It's like, why would I? That all belongs to the first world. It has nothing to do with me, actually. And if somebody, it can go into the weeds from that point.
Yes.
There,
but the essential point is that we are responsible for ourselves and the decisions and the directions that we go in this regard.
Yes. Spirituality is one of those things that simply can't be done by anybody but you. And a teacher can serve as a guide.
Yes.
But when it comes to Taoism, the teacher is serving as a guide to facilitate your interaction with the Tao. But you are already the Tao, and you're already interacting with the Tao, but
You may not know it.
Yeah, well, we're all communal beasts, and the fact is that teaching or mentoring,
Yes.
whether that's by text or by some other facility, is part of who we are as a human structure. And so we also can't impose an idealism of, oh, it must be this type of interaction. And the question is that I ask people is, well, why do you believe that? Why do you believe it has to be this type of interaction?
Oh, but questioning yourself and your actions that's one of the hardest things, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
Because you have to have the perspective first, and then you have to have the whatever it takes. I mean, it's kind of like just the guts to ask yourself if you're doing the right thing. Whew.
Well, Taoism's not really about the answers, it's about the questions.
Ooh.
And so
What does that mean?
it means that if it were about the answers, there'd be a single holy book. You could open it up, look at it, and go, oh, those are the answers. But Taoism doesn't have the answers. It has the means of getting to questions.
So different people have different answers.
They can, especially when it deals with them. So there is
Because it's deeply personal.
there is a fundamental series of, and this we can't do because there simply isn't enough time. I've actually considered writing a series of books on it. So there is a series of premises, so assumptions about the universe, which are believed to be factual and that Taoism is founded on. It was at one time a core of advanced esoteric practice, but has become largely lost with the purge of Taoism. But within many other sects, not within the Four Ascendant, where it's annoyingly present. But for example, if we start off with a fundamental premise that all things are Tao, that's the first premise. And from there, we can then draw a series of conclusions, some of which are givens, meaning that they're pieces of knowledge that we assume, some of which are logical deductions.
Okay. So there are axioms, and then the things that we can infer from those axioms.
Yes, you can make it almost linear as logic would prefer it to be, but not really.
Okay.
So, and but understanding when a thing is assumed is important. So, like, what happens if all things are not Tao? It actually fundamentally changes the nature of Taoism. It's a core concept. You either have to accept that and then proceed from it, because from all things being Tao comes all things are equal.
Yes. Yes.
Now, when I say that,
That's a stickler.
it becomes, for most people, what they hear are all people are equal, and it offshoots into it's like, no, that is not what it means. All things,
Yes.
everything that exists, regardless of whether we conceive of it as being aware or unaware, regardless of whether we recognize it as being sentient, organic, inorganic, a chair, an energy system, it's all equal.
Yeah.
Why? For one basic reason, all things are Tao.
All things are Tao.
And so if you go from that to essentially the second position, and you look at it, well, if we were to change our initial position and go, well, all things aren't Tao, suddenly inequality becomes a factor. If we start from the premise that all things are Tao, then inequality is not a factor because everything is automatically equal. You are the Tao. Then we can ask a question of, well, is that true within human society? Is it true within human interaction? Is it true within a natural scheme of let's say the old classical scheme, heaven, earth, and man?
Okay.
Is it true within that? Is it true when the ritual concepts were created, which actually came much later than the esoteric, where the system of gods, saints, and other creatures were organized around the human conception of the universe? And what you find out is that, well, if you accept the first premise, actually you start challenging many of the ceremonial and iconographic, so gods and saints
Right.
systems.
Well, that makes sense, right? I mean,
Yeah.
because those are clearly man-made conveniences.
Well, they're later additions within the social sphere. They do actually refer to things that exist, that verifiably exist in some ways, but it's partial accuracy. It's not complete accuracy.
I see.
And from a ritual perspective,
They're metaphors.
well, yeah, exactly. From a ritual perspective, it's not really essential that it be firmly grounded into what's called the true reality.
Right.
So, which proceeds through these premises and such.
So much of how we interact with the world is metaphorical. You almost can't deal with reality all the time.
I would say that's true. We work with a series of simplifications. And if you look at ritual, sometimes when I'm talking about ritual, people think I'm condemning ritual. And perhaps when I was a young blood, that was true. But sometimes a person's access to themselves and to their, let's call it the deeper self for now, and to access through the social mind, their access to the spiritual must proceed through the ceremonial and ritual. And we also have to always keep in mind, ceremony emerges for our species very, very early in the development of our species.
Oh, so it's something deep in there, something that we really do need and appreciate, and it communicates to us.
Yeah, I would say so. We always have to. So in Taoism, there's always this idea of what the natural or true human is.
Right.
Like, what is a human when the human steps outside of the social mind? Because it reveals to us our capabilities, our weaknesses, our preferences, what we're built for, what we're not built for, what we should do, what we shouldn't do.
Yes.
It's an important series of questions for a Taoist.
Yes.
And so if we study the Stone Age and we see, well, when humans were first conceiving of this, what did they do? Now, that doesn't mean it's absolutely right. That's a way of misinterpreting history. What we're saying is that humans have consistently done this thing over time, and what we can say as a result of that is that humans have a penchant for it. They have a need for it because they create it over and over again.
Right, okay.
And so to be truly human, we can't just discard it. You know what I'm saying?
Because it's been with us for so long.
It's been with us and likely reflects our structure and design.
Because it's probably been generated independently in many different cultures over whatever period of time.
Yes.
Okay.
And now you see why Taoists spend so much time on history.
Because we can learn so much from what ancestors did.
Yep. And the big thing is it reveals or allows us to question what it means to be human. What it means for us, very particularly, how do we deal with the greater reality? Because if the premise of the social mind is correct and we live in essentially a false map of the world, why? How? Those are the questions.
So are we saying that social mind is one of those things that's been created over and over and over again? Is that part of what you're saying?
You want to take the social mind journey?
Well, maybe we'll save that. No, let's save it. Let's save it. We'll do the next one. I was just going to question, some traditions are, we can say, are authentic, and others are, let's say, fabrications for renown or power, or I mean, I guess those are legitimate too. That's part of the human experience. We just haven't been able to get through and past that.
Are you talking within Taoism, across the span of human religion?
I guess I was just talking about people in general. And if we look at history, if we use history to explore what it is to be human, how do we differentiate the authentic from the artificial?
Well, what do you mean by authentic?
I don't know.
All right, if you're saying that, there are a couple possibilities, all of which are common explorations and common questions, and ones that should be repeatedly asked, because the question is more important than the answer.
Yes. Okay.
And
then let's use that. Let's wrap up this segment by exploring what's a good question to ask. What's a good first question to ask as an introduction to what we're talking about?
it would depend on your goal. So if you simply want to,
what if happiness? What if you're just unhappy?
If you're just unhappy, you would have to ask yourself the question of what you believe happiness to be. Because again, if you don't have the goal, if you don't question the goal, so when a person asks a question of, well, what would I feel like if I were happy? They're asking actually many other questions. First, they're asking a question of their emotional self. And that question can be, well, what sensation do I associate with happiness? And then you would ask the question of, well, why do I associate that with this idea of happiness?
Right.
Is it something I've experienced in childhood?
Or is it something I just heard of?
Is it something that I've heard of? Am I in fact already experiencing happiness, but I have this other image of what it means to be happy?
Yes.
Which actually happens quite often. Because I'm not happy because I'm not blah, blah, blah. And then you ask the question, well, where did that standard come from?
Yeah.
And so the question becomes important. And it starts off with, if you're going to chase happiness, and I've come up with many simplified approaches for it, which are the standard Taoist approaches. It's like, do this, do this, do this, you will experience happiness. Well, you will experience something, and that something has been identified as being happiness by the majority of people that have encountered it.
But ultimately, it does depend on your definition, your personal definition.
And the thing is that you should challenge it, because it might not be correct. You could be sitting back labeling some experience as being happy, and if you were to actually ask another person, blah, 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 are you happy? I tell you something, within this world, within the world of the mind, most people are not actually happy. They may put on a face of happy, but they're not happy. They're caught up at the bulk of time, let's say 80% of the time, they're in a state of unhappiness. 10% of the time, they're in a state of blah. And 10% of the time, they have some form of pleasure.
That's a big one.
And so you get these breakdowns, and you can only really explore it by asking that question. So even to start off on a journey for happiness, you first have to start off with, well, do the things I mean by happy the same things you mean by happy? And that's a question, right?
Do you really need to ask the question what you think of happiness? Or do I have to ask what you think of happiness? It's just...
You could, in order to calibrate it, especially if you have a perception of what another person happens to be feeling, and then you query or you ask them, and you find out, well, this person actually is experiencing something that's entirely different than what I thought they were experiencing. And we see that at a more basic social or cultural level. What's it called? Trying to outdo the Joneses or something?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've heard that.
Or you sit back and you have a perception that here is this other family with this perfect life and perfect finances, and they're harmonious. So what are all those points? Those are all points of management, right? And so you sit back and you look at it and go, well, they have it and we don't have it, so we need to somehow achieve it. And the reality is you don't. If you were to go over and talk to them, you find out they fight all the time. They're on the verge of divorce if it's a couple. The kids hate the parents hate the kids in reality.
Oh gosh,
they're mortgaged to the limit on every single thing they do.
But we don't need to know that. Do we? We don't need to know that.
You don't need to know it unless you believe that the other people have it and your perception is false.
But can't you just explore your own perceptions and figure out what you think is happy?
Yeah, it depends on where you're starting from, I think. My answer would be very simple, and that is, so let's say we were consulting, we were chatting by the fireside I would ask this question.
Okay.
And that is, why are you reluctant to ask them?
Oh, you're actually asking me that? It's none of my business.
Why is it none of your business? You see, the thing is, would that have been part of your business back in the Stone Age?
Oh.
In an early culture, in an early village with 20 huts in it? Wouldn't those things have all been things that you knew about everybody else that were around you?
Wow.
Right?
That's a big one. But
can't pursue truth without actually pursuing truth. There's no way to do it. There is a lot of inconvenience in it. You know, my teacher had this saying among his many wise, pain in the ass statements. And he was and is a wise and pain in the ass teacher, as is, I found out, actually kind of what you become over time. And that is, I forget it offhand now. Too much setup, man. Too much setup. It'll come back to me in a second.
Okay.
Oh, here it is.
Okay.
Confidentiality is cowardice.
Is that personal and community? You mean...
The thing is that he would not explain such a thing. Instead, he would expect you to do just as you did and ask that question. And have it come back to you as an annoying little prod. It is not the responsibility of the teacher to answer the question. So, especially when it comes to spirituality.
Oh, that's a tough one. That is a tough one.
But it is one to ask, right? Because how do you get from here to there?
How do you find truth and reality if there are secrets? Nature doesn't hide anything.
It's there. You
Nature
just have
is
to be
wide
able to
open.
look. Yeah. He also said something else from an esoteric,
another one.
An esoteric position,
Yes.
and that is, there are no secrets among the gods. Everybody knows everybody down to the finest details. They know the past, they know the present, they know the future. There's no excuses, there's no running from it. You just have to accept it. And you can believe or disbelieve that based on your own experience.
Yeah.
But that would be a very clear point that he would make, is that all these things within human society that have been moved into the forbidden or unknowable are neither forbidden nor unknowable at any of the other advanced layers of being. And so,
It's a human convenience.
well, how can you expect to move up in spiritual being if you adhere to the lowest layers of being?
Ouch.
Questions? Now, am I saying that rhetorically? Perhaps, I don't know. But it's also a straightforward question. I mean, is there a way of moving up without doing blah, blah, blah? If you explore it and prod it and it remains the same, guess what? It's probably the same. And so, as with Taoism, you can ask all the questions you want. The more you ask, the stronger it gets. The less you ask, the weaker it is. It requires the question. There's no way around it. You may not like the answer, you may not answer correctly, you may not answer correctly with the correct follow-up questions, you may do everything correctly. But it's all up to you when it goes through walking through that process. You'd have, like you and I, stimulating that thought process within somebody listening to us right now, because that's part of what we do as humans. We exchange that, and actually the conversation we're having right now, very much like a conversation I would have with Soon, except perhaps he would be more proddy. So you're like, well, why would you believe or accept that? It's like, I have no idea why I believe or accept that. So,
And then push you off a cliff.
well, that happened more than once.
All right, we'll wrap up this session with that, and we'll catch you next time on our walks through
Thank you all.
Taoism.